The stench hit me first, a sickly sweet tang of ozone and something charred, something organic. It clung to the air, thick and metallic, even through the respirator. The lab, or what was left of Dr. Aris Thorne's state-of-the-art bioengineering sanctuary, was a testament to instantaneous chaos. Twisted conduits sagged from the ceiling like ruptured veins. Workstations, once pristine surfaces for groundbreaking research, were now skeletal frames, their screens shattered, their components melted into grotesque sculptures of plastic and metal. Glass shards glittered everywhere, a dangerous, deceptive glitter, reflecting the emergency lights that pulsed a frantic red and blue through the reinforced windows. My gaze swept the devastation, a practiced reflex, taking in the scale of the destruction. This wasn't a contained incident, this was a complete failure, a violent unraveling of intricate systems. The air still thrummed with residual energy, a phantom vibration that resonated in my chest. The lead detective, a stocky man with weary eyes that seemed to have seen too many similar scenes, met my gaze across a debris field that had once been a containment unit. His voice, muffled by his own mask, cut through the low hum of the portable ventilation units. "Accident," he stated, his tone flat, resigned. "Or suicide. Looks like he was messing with something volatile, and it went sideways. No forced entry, security logs are clean, all internal." He gestured vaguely at the victim, Dr. Thorne, or what remained of him, slumped against a scorched console, his form barely discernible amidst the ruin. I nodded, but the words felt hollow in my chest. Accident. Suicide. Easy answers, too easy. My gaze drifted past the obvious devastation, past the victim's tragic stillness, searching for the discordant note. It was always there, if you knew how to listen for it, how to look past the grand symphony of destruction to the single instrument playing off-key. Most people saw only the calamity, the sheer force of the event. My job was to see the fingerprints on the chaos. The central blast point was evident, a crater of fused material where the primary containment system had clearly failed. The surrounding walls were blackened, peeled back in layers like a ruined onion. But then, a few meters away, on a section of the reinforced polymer flooring that seemed relatively untouched by the main force, I saw it. A series of fine, almost delicate scorch marks, radiating outwards from a pinpoint origin. They weren't deep, not like the other blast damage. These were superficial, almost etched, like the ghost of a starburst pattern on the gray surface. They spoke of a localized, directed energy, not the indiscriminate fury of a general explosion. I knelt, carefully, my gloved fingers hovering inches above the floor. The air around that specific spot felt different. Cooler, somehow, despite the general heat emanating from the ruined lab. My eyes narrowed, tracing the faint lines. And nestled in the very center of that faint starburst, visible only because a stray beam of emergency light caught its surface, was a minuscule fragment. Dark, irregular, no bigger than a grain of sand, yet it shimmered with an unnatural, almost iridescent sheen. It wasn't glass. It wasn't metal from the lab's usual components. It was something else entirely. Something alien to this scene of conventional destruction. A prickle of unease began to spread through me, quiet but insistent. This wasn't just a miscalculation. This wasn't just a tragic end to a brilliant mind. This was something else. I felt it in my gut, a quiet hum of certainty that contradicted the shouts of chaos around me, the easy assumptions of the detective. I meticulously documented the location, photographed the anomaly from every conceivable angle, the faint starburst pattern and the glittering fragment captured in high-resolution detail. Then, with a specialized microtweezer, I carefully collected the fragment, placing it into a sterile evidence file. It was the first piece of the puzzle, and it already didn't fit the picture everyone else was painting. Hours later, the sterile white walls of the crime lab evidence processing cleanroom felt like a stark contrast to the destruction I'd left behind. The air here was filtered to near perfection, devoid of the lingering odors of scorched metal and ozone. I sat at a workstation, the fragment I'd recovered from Thorne's lab now under the powerful magnification of a digital microscope. The lead detective's words echoed in my mind: accident. Suicide. But my gut, and now my eyes, told a different story. Under 500x magnification, the fragment revealed its true nature, a complex, layered structure, almost crystalline, yet with an organic, almost fibrous quality. It refracted light in a way I'd never seen before, a subtle dance of greens and purples. It was resilient, too, even the blast hadn't shattered its internal integrity. And the scorch marks, replicated now in high-resolution images on the screen beside it, were too precise, too uniform. They spoke of a directed energy, a contained burst, not a random explosion. A weapon, perhaps? Or a tool used with deadly intent? The implications were unsettling. Dr. Aris Thorne might not have been a victim of his own genius, but of someone else's deliberate, meticulous design. The stench of ozone and scorched organics still clung to my nostrils, even hours later, even after I'd shed the contaminated gear. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed, casting a cold, even glow over the examination table where what remained of Aris Thorne lay. A technician, gloved and masked, meticulously worked nearby, cataloging debris fragments. I pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, the material snapping tight against my skin, and leaned closer to the body. The initial report had been swift, catastrophic lab accident, likely an explosion of a volatile compound. Suicide or a fatal miscalculation. But I'd seen enough accidents to know that sometimes, chaos was merely a meticulously crafted disguise. Thorne's body was a testament to immense thermal and concussive force. His clothing was mostly vaporized, skin seared, and blackened in broad swathes. Yet, I noticed it immediately, the pattern. The burns were severe, yes, but they weren't uniform. There was a peculiar localization, a distinct absence of the widespread, chaotic damage I'd expect from an uncontained explosion. It was almost as if the primary force had been focused, directed, rather than an unbridled, all-encompassing blast. See that? I murmured to the chief forensic examiner. A seasoned veteran with a perpetually weary expression, gesturing to a relatively intact section of Thorne's upper torso, near his left shoulder. Minimal shrapnel embedding here. Yet the right side, particularly the arm, is severely compromised. The examiner nodded slowly, her brow furrowed behind her clear visor. Not what you'd expect from a central blast point, no. It suggests a more asymmetric force, perhaps a contained directional charge, or a secondary, localized event. A contained directional charge. An accident didn't direct its force. I continued my meticulous scan, my eyes tracing every inch of exposed skin, every singed hair follicle. My gaze snagged on a minute imperfection on Thorne's left forearm, just above the wrist. It was easy to miss, almost camouflaged by the ash and soot. I leaned in closer, activating the magnifying lamp. Embedded just beneath the surface of the skin, barely visible, was a microscopic, crystalline shard. It caught the light with an almost iridescent shimmer, a faint, almost metallic sheen. It wasn't glass, nor any polymer I recognized from Thorne's lab inventory. I'd spent years studying the composition of lab materials, the unique signatures of various reagents and equipment. This was alien. "Hold that," I instructed the examiner, my voice tight with a sudden surge of adrenaline. "Don't touch it." Under the optical microscope, its facets were unnaturally sharp, its structure unlike any organic or common inorganic material. It certainly wasn't a product of Thorne's bioengineering research, nor did it match any known component of his lab equipment. This was a unique, non-lab-related trace element. It was out of place. It was deliberate. This wasn't an accident. Aris Thorne had been murdered. And whoever did it went to extraordinary lengths to stage the scene, but they missed this. Later that afternoon, the preliminary interviews began. My colleague, a sharp-eyed investigator named Miller, set up the conference room. The first to arrive was a rival scientist, Dr. Silas Vance. Vance was a man whose ambition was as thinly veiled as his contempt for Thorne. They had a history, a bitter public feud over intellectual property and grant funding, amplified by Thorne's increasingly reclusive and secretive work. Vance sat stiffly across the table, his tailored suit immaculate, his face a mask of practiced solemnity. "A tragedy, of course," he began, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "Aris was brilliant. Unpredictable, perhaps. Reckless, even. His latest project, the Genesis research, was highly volatile. I warned him, repeatedly, about the risks." "Risks of what, precisely?" I asked, my gaze unwavering. "Of pushing boundaries too far," Vance replied, a hint of something resembling smugness flickering in his eyes before he quickly masked it. He was on the verge of something truly revolutionary, something that could redefine bioengineering. But he cut corners. He always did, driven by that insatiable need for first discovery. I pressed him on their rivalry, the specifics of their disagreements. Vance admitted to heated exchanges, to professional envy, but denied any personal animosity that would lead to violence. "We were competitors, Reed, not enemies." His death. It sets back the entire field. Though, I admit, it does open up certain opportunities for my own research. The casual admission, delivered with a shrug, spoke volumes. Next was Maya, a former research assistant. She arrived looking disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed. She'd been let go from Thorne's lab just a few months prior, reportedly after a ferocious argument. Her story painted a picture of Thorne as demanding, possessive, and paranoid. He was obsessed with his Genesis project, she recounted, her voice trembling slightly. He became incredibly secretive, locking away data, refusing to share even with his closest team. He accused me of trying to steal his ideas, of leaking information to competitors. It was insane. I just wanted credit for my contributions. "Did he threaten you?" I asked. She hesitated, chewing on her lip. "He threatened my career. Said he'd make sure I never worked in this field again. He said he'd ruin me. He was capable of it, too. He was a vindictive man, for all his genius." "Did you ever consider retaliation?" Miller interjected, his voice flat. Maya's head snapped up, her eyes wide. No. Never. I was angry, yes, but not. Not like that. I just wanted my work recognized. Her hands wrung together in her lap, her gaze dropping to the table. I hated him for what he did, but I didn't kill him. Two plausible motives, two individuals with clear reasons to resent Thorne. Vance, for professional gain and a long-standing rivalry. Maya, for professional ruin and a thirst for recognition. The crystalline shard, however, still hummed in my mind, a tiny, glittering piece of evidence that didn't fit either narrative of a simple, vengeful act. It pointed to something far more intricate, something planned. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that this investigation was only just beginning. It was unlike any material I'd encountered in accidental lab explosions. Too structured, too clean. I leaned closer, my breath shallow against the filtered air. The shard, carefully scraped from the singed floorboards near where Thorne's body had been found, was an anomaly. Most debris from a catastrophic bioreactor failure would be molten, fractured, or vaporized. This was intact. And it had an edge to it, not sharp enough to cut, but a distinct, manufactured linearity. My gut clenched. This wasn't the byproduct of an accident. Says it's complex. On my way, I replied, carefully sealing the shard in its evidence container before removing my gloves and stepping through the airlock. The transition from the pristine silence of the clean room to the low murmur of the main forensics lab was jarring. I found the lead digital analyst hunched over a bank of monitors, lines of code scrolling endlessly across the screens like an alien script. "What have you got?" I asked, pulling up a chair. The analyst gestured to a highlighted section. Thorne's main research server. It's encrypted, of course, but we've cracked the outer layers. What's inside is concerning. He paused, adjusting his glasses. He was working on advanced genetic sequencing, pushing boundaries I didn't even know existed. We're talking about direct cellular reprogramming, targeting specific markers. The potential applications are immense, global health breakthroughs, or, he lowered his voice, a new generation of bioweaponry, depending on the intent. My gaze sharpened. And the concerning part? Someone tried to wipe a significant portion of the project files, he said, tapping a finger on a fragmented log. Not just delete. A sophisticated, multi-pass overwrite. They used a custom-built utility, designed to leave minimal trace. We've managed to recover fragments, ghost files, but the core data related to the final stages of his research is heavily corrupted. A wipe? I pressed, the word echoing the precision of the crystalline shard. When? Within hours of the incident. Maybe even minutes before the explosion. The timestamps are erratic, deliberately obfuscated, but the last activity recorded points to a frantic, targeted cleanup. The analyst looked at me, his expression grim. This wasn't Thorne hitting delete in a panic. This was someone who knew exactly what they were looking for, and exactly how to make it disappear. My mind raced, connecting the dots. A meticulously placed object, a precisely targeted data wipe. Both spoke of intent, of a careful, calculated effort to erase a narrative. An accident wouldn't necessitate such a deliberate scrubbing. This was a cover-up. "Get me the assistant," I instructed, my voice flat. "The one who worked most closely with Thorne." "Maya." Maya arrived 15 minutes later, her eyes red-rimmed and her posture slumped. She clutched a mug of lukewarm tea, her knuckles white. The fluorescent lights of the interview room seemed to leach all color from her face. "Thank you for coming in again, Maya," I began, my voice even. "I have a few more questions about Dr. Thorne's recent work." She nodded, not meeting my gaze. "I'll try to help. It's all still a blur." "We've been reviewing the project files," I continued, watching her closely. "It appears there was some unusual activity on the main server just before the incident. An attempt to delete certain files. Do you know anything about that?" Her head snapped up, a flicker of something, fear? Recognition? In her eyes before it vanished. "Delete files?" "No. Dr. Thorne was very particular about his data. These were attempts to erase specific project data, very aggressively." She wrung her hands. He was different these past few weeks. Jumpy. He kept talking about watchers and spies. He even started encrypting his personal notes, which he never did before. Paranoia? "I don't know," she murmured, finally looking at me, her eyes wide and pleading. He said his work was too important, too dangerous, to fall into the wrong hands. He was obsessed with securing it. He spent days, sometimes nights, just reviewing security logs, changing access codes." "Did he ever mention anyone specific? Anyone he suspected?" She shook her head slowly. "No. Just them. He said they were closing in." She took a shaky breath. He seemed convinced that someone was trying to steal his research, or worse, weaponize it before he could finalize his ethical safeguards. "Ethical safeguards?" I repeated. That was a new detail. Yes. He was very clear that this technology, if misused, could be catastrophic. He talked about a kill switch for the project, a way to render the data inert if it ever fell into hostile hands. But he never told me how it worked. A kill switch or a cover-up. The two concepts felt uncomfortably close. Thorne's paranoia, Maya's fear, the fragmented data, the crystalline shard, they coalesced into a disturbing pattern. The question now was, what exactly had Thorne been on the verge of discovering, and who stood to gain from its permanent disappearance? The tension in the room was almost palpable, a heavy weight pressing down. This was no accident. This was a carefully orchestrated execution, masked by a devastating explosion. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh, even glow, reflecting off the polished steel surfaces and the clear acrylic of containment hoods. I stood over a workstation, my gaze fixed on the magnified image projected onto a monitor. Beside it, the microscopic remnants of the unusual burn pattern, a faint, almost iridescent film, demanded my complete attention. A colleague, a meticulous technician whose hands were as steady as his gaze, worked precisely at the microscope. Ready for the spectral analysis. "Read," he murmured, his voice a low counterpoint to the room's quiet efficiency. "Initiate full-spectrum scan on the burn residue." I instructed, my eyes still locked on the screen. "Prioritize inorganic compounds, then organic." I want to know what this film is made of. My mind raced. Thorne's lab was a fortress, yet someone had breached it, leaving behind this minute, yet profoundly significant, calling card. The fragmented data, Maya's fear, the notion of a kill switch, they all pointed to a deliberate act. This residue, whatever it was, held the key to identifying not just what happened, but who was behind it. If it was a unique substance, it could narrow down the field of potential perpetrators dramatically. If it was common, then the killer had been exceptionally careful, or exceptionally lucky. I didn't believe in luck. The technician's fingers danced over the console. A rainbow of lines, peaks, and troughs began to populate the monitor, charting the spectral fingerprint of the residue. Minutes stretched, each one feeling like an hour. I leaned closer, my breath held, watching the data accumulate. The first few passes showed nothing remarkable, common elements that could be found almost anywhere. Then, a new set of peaks emerged, sharp and distinct, unlike anything I'd seen in a typical lab accident profile. "Hold it there," I said, pointing to a cluster of anomalies. "Zoom in on those specific wavelengths." The technician complied, isolating the unique signature. He cross-referenced it against the lab's extensive material database. The system whirred, processing billions of data points. After a tense silence, a match flared on the screen. "Read," the technician said, his voice laced with surprise, "it's a synthetic polymer. Extremely rare. The database identifies it as a specialized compound used in high-end industrial applications. Proprietary, by the looks of it." A cold certainty settled over me. Not a lab accident. Not suicide. This was a deliberate act, executed with a precision that spoke of careful planning and access to incredibly specific materials. The kill switch wasn't just hypothetical, it was a physical reality, and the residue was its signature. This polymer wasn't something Thorne would have used in his biological research. It was a foreign agent, introduced with a purpose. My focus shifted instantly. Academic rivals might harbor grudges, but they rarely had access to rare, proprietary industrial polymers. This pointed directly to corporate entities, the kind that funded groundbreaking research with an eye toward monopolizing its results. Omnicorp, Thorne's primary financial backer, immediately sprang to mind. They had the resources, the motive, and a history of aggressive R&D acquisition. I left the clean room, the hum of the machines fading behind me, replaced by the louder thrum of my own thoughts. The lead detective met me in the hallway, his face a question mark. "We have a lead," I stated, handing him a printed analysis report. That accident involved a synthetic polymer. Proprietary, industrial grade. Nothing Thorne would have had in his bioengineering lab. This wasn't an accident. It was a targeted act. The detective's brow furrowed as he scanned the report. Omnicorp, he mused, the name hanging in the air like a pronouncement. They were his biggest investor. They also have the means to develop or acquire such materials. I added. And a clear motive to control Thorne's research, by any means necessary. Within the hour, we were sitting in a sterile, impersonal conference room at Omnicorp's sprawling corporate headquarters. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, a stark contrast to the closed-off world of Thorne's lab. Across the polished table sat Omnicorp's liaison, a woman whose impeccable tailored suit and composed demeanor radiated corporate power. Her smile was too practiced, her eyes betraying a subtle tension. "We are, of course, utterly devastated by Dr. Thorne's untimely passing," the liaison began, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "He was a visionary. Thorne's research was primarily biological. Our contributions were largely financial, along with logistical support for equipment acquisition, security, that sort of thing. Any specific materials would have been procured through his own channels, subject to our oversight, naturally. This particular polymer," I pressed, pushing the printed spectral analysis across the table. "It's rare, proprietary. Does Omnicorp manufacture or utilize anything with this specific chemical signature?" She picked up the report, her perfectly manicured thumb tracing the peaks and valleys of the graph. He took him time, a deliberate pause that felt designed to project calm. "Our R&D portfolio is vast, read. We work with thousands of compounds. To identify this specific signature without knowing its application, it would require a significant internal audit. We'd be happy to cooperate fully, of course." "Happy to cooperate, but vague on specifics," I observed, my gaze unwavering. Dr. Thorne's lab had a high security clearance, yet this material was found within the perimeter of the incident. Thorne's explicit authorization. And all entries were logged, of course. We can provide those logs. She offered a stack of binders, thick with printouts. It was an overwhelming amount of data, a deliberate distraction. "And your security protocols," I continued, ignoring the binders. "Would they prevent someone from introducing a foreign substance? Perhaps disguised as something else, into the lab environment?" He finally broke eye contact, looking past me at the city skyline. "Our protocols are robust. Read. Designed to prevent all forms of unauthorized access or interference. We pride ourselves on our security." Her voice had taken on a defensive edge. "We believe this was a tragic accident, a miscalculation on Dr. Thorne's part, as initially reported. We are confident our security was not breached." Her certainty felt forced. The sheer volume of information he was willing to provide, coupled with her evasiveness on the specific polymer, painted a clear picture. He was trying too hard to be helpful, to appear transparent, while simultaneously obscuring the very information I needed. The air in the room, once sterile, now felt thick with unspoken implications. Omnicorp had more than just a financial stake in Thorne's work, they had a direct connection to the very element that contradicted the official narrative. And the liaison, with her practiced smile and careful words, was guarding a secret. My gloved hands moved with practiced precision, isolating a minute fragment of the polymer from a control sample. He had tried to drown me in information, hoping I wouldn't notice the single, crucial detail she withheld. The specific composition, the precise molecular structure of this polymer, remained an enigma she'd guarded with a forced smile. I leaned closer to the electron microscope, its cold lens offering a glimpse into a world invisible to the naked eye. The trace I found near Thorne's workstation, embedded just beneath a scorched surface, matched this control fragment perfectly. It wasn't standard lab equipment, nor was it part of Thorne's known research materials. It was an anomaly, a foreign body in a sterile environment, and its presence contradicted the narrative of a simple accident. Someone had gone to great lengths to introduce it, or to ensure it was present at the scene. My gut tightened. This wasn't just about the polymer anymore, it was about the deliberate obfuscation surrounding it. Hours bled into one another. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sound for a long time. My focus narrowed to the specific characteristics of the polymer, cross-referencing against various industrial and experimental databases. The sheer volume of material was overwhelming, but I knew the answer was buried within it, a specific signature waiting to be uncovered. Leaving the lab that evening, the city air felt thick and heavy after the sterile confines of the clean room. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, and the usual evening traffic blurred into a river of red taillights. I was halfway across a busy intersection, my mind still replaying the colleague's strained expression, when the roar of an engine ripped through the urban din. It wasn't just drifting, it was a sudden, deliberate swerve directly into my path. My reflexes, honed by years of navigating unpredictable scenes, kicked in. I lunged forward, a clumsy, desperate scramble that threw me clear of the car's immediate trajectory. I heard the blare of a horn from another driver, a distant shout. The sedan didn't slow, didn't hesitate. I stood there, breathing hard, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. A near miss? Perhaps. But the precision of the swerve, the lack of braking, the immediate acceleration away. It felt too sharp, too intentional to be a random act of reckless driving. Just another impatient driver in a hurry. But I knew better. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. The next morning, back in my personal lab, the feeling of unease solidified. I'd left a particular series of research notes, pertaining to the polymer's potential industrial applications, stacked neatly on the corner of my main workbench. A heavy lead paperweight, a gift from a retired supervisor, always held them down. Now, the paperweight was shifted a fraction of an inch to the left, and the stack of papers, while still ostensibly neat, was ever so slightly misaligned. An imperceptible difference to anyone else, but to me, it was glaring. I knew my space. I knew the precise arrangement of every tool, every document. This wasn't a random jostle. Someone had been in my lab. Someone had touched my work. The message was clearer now. They weren't just trying to slow me down, they were watching me. They knew what I was focused on. The polymer. It was Maya, the research colleague. I need to talk to you. I can't do this over the phone. Where are you? I kept my voice calm, even as a knot tightened in my stomach. Please. I'm scared. I drove across town, the memory of the swerving sedan still vivid. When I reached her apartment, she opened the door a crack, her eyes wide and bloodshot, her hair disheveled. She wrung her hands, pacing a tight circle in her living room. I shouldn't have held back. I know you know I did. About the polymer. I didn't want to get involved, but now. She gestured vaguely, her eyes darting to the windows. They know I talked to you. Who knows, Maya? I pressed gently, my gaze steady. What happened? I saw him. She stopped pacing, hugging herself tightly. Before Thorne. Before it all happened. A few times. Late at night. I work late sometimes, you know? And I saw someone going into Thorne's lab. Not Thorne. Not one of us. A stranger. My mind sharpened. Describe him. Tall. Lean. He moved like he was trying not to be seen, but I still caught glimpses. He used Thorne's access, somehow. I never understood how. I just assumed Thorne let him in for some secret project. But then Thorne died, and I kept thinking about it. And then you started asking about the polymer, and I remembered. I saw him once, carrying something. It looked like the kind Thorne used for highly volatile compounds. The kind that an unknown individual, accessing Thorne's high-security lab after hours, using Thorne's access, carrying a suspicious container. And now, Maya was terrified. My own accidents suddenly made perfect sense. It was a sterile, unforgiving environment, all gleaming stainless steel and diffused, shadowless light, designed to eradicate contamination, but it couldn't erase the insidious fingerprints of a meticulously planned deception. I sat before a bank of monitors, my eyes scanning lines of code, sensor readouts, and security camera timestamps, the cold reality of Maya's words echoing in my mind. An unknown individual, accessing Thorne's high-security lab after hours, using Thorne's access, carrying a suspicious container. My recent accidents hadn't been accidents at all. On the primary screen, a graphical representation of Thorne's lab pulsed, a digital blueprint overlaid with a spiderweb of data points. Every environmental sensor, every access panel, every piece of equipment was cataloged, its operational history laid bare. I started with the most obvious anomalies, the spikes and dips that screamed not normal. The initial reports pointed to a catastrophic system failure, a volatile reaction gone wrong, but the deeper I delved, the more those convenient explanations unraveled. I zeroed in on the hour leading up to the incident. Thorne's access logs showed him entering the lab, then a gap. A significant, anomalous gap, before a second entry, also under Thorne's credentials, at 2:17. This was the window. This was when the unknown individual Maya had mentioned would have been inside. They weren't fumbling, they knew the layout. And in their gloved hand, a cylindrical container, just as Maya had described. Next, I cross-referenced the video feed with the lab's atmospheric control logs. The air pressure in Thorne's specific research bay, usually maintained with surgical precision, showed a subtle, almost imperceptible drop, then a rapid ascent, just before the catastrophic event. It wasn't a malfunction, it was a deliberate manipulation, a staged fluctuation designed to destabilize the delicate atmospheric balance Thorne's work demanded. This wasn't a random act, it was a specific, targeted adjustment that required intimate knowledge of Thorne's protocols. I pulled up the schematics for the lab's bespoke ventilation system. Thorne had designed it himself, a complex network of ducts and filters to handle his unique bioagents. The environmental control logs indicated a temporary override of the primary intake valves in Thorne's bay, diverting a specific gas mixture into the area. Not a leak, but an injection. A controlled, precise injection. The suspicious container, I realized, wasn't just a prop, it was the delivery system. My fingers flew across the keyboard, correlating the gas injection with the power fluctuations in the experimental apparatus. Thorne's core project involved highly sensitive biological compounds, requiring specific energy frequencies for activation. It was a digital ripple effect, a cascade of precisely timed events. First, the atmospheric manipulation, creating a volatile environment. Then, the targeted gas injection, introducing a catalyst. Finally, the microsurges, triggering the final, fatal reaction. It was a multi-stage manipulation, orchestrated with the precision of a master clockmaker. That accident wasn't an accident at all, it was a performance, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to mimic a tragic research malfunction. The burn patterns I'd noted on the lab's containment unit, the subtle discoloration that hadn't fit a simple explosion, they suddenly made sense. The specific chemical signatures from the microscopic trace, initially baffling, now pointed directly to the catalyst introduced through the ventilation system. The killer hadn't just created an explosion, they had engineered a specific type of explosion, one that left behind a tailored signature, designed to look like Thorne's work had gone awry. This wasn't some random opportunist. This was someone who understood Thorne's research down to the molecular level, someone who knew the lab's intricate systems, its vulnerabilities, its unique safeguards. They knew which buttons to push, which values to tweak, which sequences to initiate to turn Thorne's own brilliant work against him. And the remote trigger? The log showed a brief, encrypted data packet, routed through an external server, hitting the lab's network just moments before the cascade began. Untraceable, for now. I leaned back, the sterile air feeling suddenly heavy. I wasn't just investigating a death, I was disturbing a very dangerous individual, someone who had already shown a willingness to eliminate obstacles. And I was becoming the next one. I stared at the magnified image on the screen, a minute residue from the unusual burn pattern found near Thorne's workstation. The official report would call it collateral damage from an explosion. I called it a lie. The precision of the damage, the deliberate chemical signature, the way it had been engineered to point away from foul play, it wasn't about theft. If the killer simply wanted Thorne's research, they could have copied it, extracted it, or even coerced him. Instead, they'd staged a complex accident, eliminating Thorne and, ostensibly, his work. This wasn't about acquiring, it was about preventing. A cold certainty settled in my gut. The killer didn't just want the data, they wanted to stop its completion, its public release, its very existence. Thorne must have been on the verge of something truly disruptive, something so significant that its suppression justified such an elaborate, deadly charade. What could be so dangerous? The initial sweep had found nothing overtly suspicious: standard research files, project drafts, scientific papers. But if Thorne was aware of a threat, if he was trying to prevent something, he wouldn't have left his true intentions in plain sight. He was a man who built high-security labs, he understood discretion. I signaled to the digital forensics expert, a quiet individual whose fingers danced across keyboards with unnerving speed. I need another pass on Thorne's personal terminal. Not just the main directories. I need you to dig into every byte, every hidden partition, every scrap of deleted data. Look for anything encrypted, anything unusual in the metadata, anything that screams concealed. The expert nodded, already moving towards the terminal. It's been thoroughly scanned, read. We ran all our standard decryption algorithms. Standard isn't going to cut it here, I countered, my voice firm. Thorne was meticulous. He wouldn't use anything standard if he was hiding something critical. Think outside the box. Look for steganography, custom encryption, anything that might be disguised as system files or even corrupted data. He was a bioengineer, yes, but he built his own damn security systems. He'd know how to hide things from people like us. Hours later, the clean room was still humming, but the tension had ratcheted up several notches. I watched the expert's screen, a kaleidoscope of hexadecimal code in file trees. Then, a flicker. It was labeled generically, a string of random characters, but the expert's software flagged it as unusually complex for a diagnostic file. "Got something," the expert announced, their voice tight with concentration. "It's not a standard encryption. It looks custom-built, layered. We're running a brute force on the outer shell, but it's going to take time." The wait was agonizing. I paced the narrow confines of the clean room, my mind racing, trying to anticipate what Thorne might have hidden. If my hypothesis was correct, this wasn't just about his research, it was about the wider implications, the forces at play. The expert leaned back, a faint exhalation escaping them. "We're in. It's a series of encrypted journal entries, disguised as project notes." My breath hitched. "Open them." The first entry flickered onto the screen, dated several months prior to Thorne's death. His voice, transcribed into text, was formal, precise, yet imbued with an undercurrent of profound unease. Entry 147. Project Chimera continues to yield results beyond initial projections. While the applications for medical advancement are undeniable, the potential for weaponization is becoming increasingly apparent. My initial ethical framework for this research is no longer sufficient. Weaponization. I'd suspected his research was valuable, but this was a different level of threat. The entries continued, each one deepening the pit in my stomach. Thorne's growing alarm became palpable. He detailed his attempts to raise concerns with various oversight bodies, his frustration with bureaucratic stonewalling, and then, the bombshell. Entry 192. My inquiries into the funding streams for Project Chimera have led me to disturbing conclusions. Omnicorp, while publicly supporting my research, is clandestinely funding a parallel, far more aggressive development track through shell corporations. This separate project, codenamed Aris, is explicitly focused on weaponizing Chimera's principles. Omnicorp. The corporate giant that had been so quick to offer condolences in PR statements after Thorne's accident. This wasn't just about a rival stealing research, this was about a powerful corporation developing a bioweapon, and Thorne had found out. Entry 198. I can no longer remain silent. My ethical obligations supersede any contractual agreements. I have begun compiling irrefutable evidence of Project Aris and Omnicorp's involvement. I intend to release this information to the public, along with a full disclosure of my own research and its inherent dangers, within the next 2 weeks. Thorne had planned to expose them. The complexity of the murder method, the elaborate staging, it all clicked into place. The motive wasn't simple theft, it was absolute, desperate suppression. And suddenly, the case wasn't just a murder investigation anymore. It was a race against a much larger, more dangerous enemy. 2 weeks. My fingers flew across the backlit keyboard, the only sound apart from the room's mechanical breathing. It was a digital haystack, but I was looking for a very specific needle, a ghost, a shadow with the precise technical knowledge to orchestrate the elaborate sabotage, and the motive to silence a man who knew too much. I started with the access logs for Thorne's research lab. Hundreds of entries. Too many. I filtered by those with level 4 clearance or higher, the kind of access required to even approach the core experimental apparatus. That narrowed the list to 73 individuals. Still too broad. Next, I cross-referenced the list with individuals possessing expertise in molecular engineering and advanced security system protocols. The killer hadn't just blown up a lab, they'd manipulated a complex system, bypassed security redundancies, and then erased their digital footprints with chilling precision. That skill set was rare. The screen flickered, displaying a new, much shorter list. 12 names. 12 potential inside men. I pulled up each profile, scanning their academic backgrounds, their project histories, their personal declarations. Most were brilliant, dedicated researchers, their lives an open book of grants, publications, and professional accolades. I filed through them methodically, looking for anything that felt out of place. A gap in employment. An unusual transfer. A specific project that might have given them unique insight into Thorne's work outside their immediate remit. My gaze snagged on the profile of the Omnicorp liaison. His name was David Thorne, no relation to Aris, a detail noted in his HR file. I'd met him briefly during the initial assessment of the scene, a calm, almost unnervingly composed man in a perfectly tailored suit, offering corporate condolences and assurances of full cooperation. At the time, I dismissed him as a typical corporate functionary, a face for the company. Now, his name stood out on the shortlist. I clicked on his expanded profile. His academic record was impeccable, a doctorate in chemical engineering, followed by a rapid ascent through Omnicorp's corporate structure. But further down, buried beneath the glowing performance reviews and project successes, was a section labeled Prior Experience, Classified. I had to override a higher-level encryption lock. A process that took several tense minutes, the blue progress bar crawling across the screen while the clean room's hum seemed to intensify, mocking my impatience. When the file finally unlocked, the details hit me like a physical blow. David Thorne's early career wasn't in corporate management or research. It was a 5-year stint with a private security contractor, specializing in covert operations and intelligence gathering for various international entities. The language was deliberately vague, but the implications were stark. This wasn't just a liaison, this was a trained operative. My breath hitched. I scrolled further, my eyes devouring the text. His transfer to Omnicorp was listed as a strategic integration, a move designed to leverage his unique skill set in corporate asset protection. The euphemisms were almost laughable. This man wasn't protecting assets, he was likely acquiring them, or ensuring they remained secure from others. Then, the true bombshell. A reference to a prior incident, nearly a decade ago, involving a major intellectual property theft from a rival biotech firm. David Thorne had been deeply involved in the recovery efforts, a complex operation that reportedly involved infiltration, data extraction, and neutralizing rival agents. The incident had been hushed up, settled out of court with an aggressive non-disclosure agreement, but the underlying details painted a clear picture. The rival firm's CEO, a brilliant but volatile inventor, had been found dead shortly after the IP was recovered, ruled an accidental overdose. The corporate liaison, the man who had been so helpful and composed, was anything but. He had the technical expertise, the access, the operational background, and a documented history of involvement in situations eerily similar to Aris Thorne's death, all centered around stolen intellectual property. My jaw tightened. This wasn't merely a suspect, he was the prime suspect. The elaborate sabotage wasn't just a sophisticated murder, it was a professional hit, executed by someone with the skills of a ghost and the backing of an organization that valued secrets more than human lives. The tension in the room, once just the hum of machinery, now felt like a tightening noose. I had my inside man. Now, I just had to prove it. 2 weeks. The complexity of the murder method, the elusive nature of the evidence, all pointed to someone intimately familiar with Thorne's work, someone with access and a motive that ran deeper than a simple professional rivalry. My gaze swept over the meticulously organized trays of microfragments, each labeled, each a whisper from the past. I knew who it was. Now, I just needed to prove it. My plan solidified. I needed a lure, something potent enough to flush out a killer who believed they'd covered every track. It couldn't be a direct accusation, that would only send them deeper into the shadows. I orchestrated a controlled leak. Not a public announcement, but a carefully circulated internal memo, marked with a low-level security clearance, hinting at a major breakthrough in the re-evaluation of residual energy signatures from Thorne's lab. The memo stated that a specialized team was now able to isolate unique vibrational frequencies within the polymer matrix, suggesting that the catastrophic event was not an accident. A highly controlled, externally initiated reaction. I made sure the memo circulated through channels that David Thorne, Thorne's own brother and a high-ranking corporate executive, would inevitably intercept. The language was deliberately technical, designed to sound like a legitimate scientific advancement, but also to subtly imply that the accident was now being reclassified as something far more deliberate. I mentioned a newly identified, highly stable conductive polymer in the report, a substance only Aris Thorne and his inner circle would recognize as central to his most sensitive work. The weight was agonizing. Each sterile breath of filtered air felt heavy, stretched thin by anticipation. I spent hours poring over the evidence once more, double-checking the microscopic traces, confirming the burn patterns, ensuring every piece of the puzzle was in its rightful place for the inevitable confrontation. I wanted no ambiguity, no room for denial. 3 days later, the trap sprung. David Thorne, his usually composed features etched with a barely perceptible tension, moved with an urgency I'd never witnessed from him. He approached the terminal, his access card swiping with a practiced ease that suggested frequent use. He wasn't browsing, he was searching for something specific, something to delete, to erase. He was trying to neutralize the phantom breakthrough I'd invented. "Looking for something, David?" I asked, my voice cutting through the hushed whir of the servers. He froze, his shoulders stiffening before he slowly turned. The forced smile he offered was brittle, cracking at the edges. "Read. Just reviewing some departmental figures. Standard corporate oversight, you understand." I stepped closer, blocking his path to the terminal. Corporate oversight doesn't usually involve trying to delete newly processed forensic data, especially not data regarding Aris's final project. His jaw tightened. "I have no idea what you're talking about. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," I said, my gaze unwavering. "The memo about the re-evaluation of the residual energy signatures? The one detailing the unique vibrational frequencies in the polymer matrix? The highly controlled, externally initiated reaction?" I watched his eyes, seeing the subtle twitch, the minute shift in focus. "You understood that memo perfectly, didn't you, David? Aris's death was a tragic accident. Everyone knows that. Everyone thought that, I corrected, pulling a sealed evidence bag from my coat. Inside, a minuscule, iridescent filament gleamed under the fluorescent lights. This is a fragment of a unique, highly stable conductive polymer. We found microscopic traces of it at Aris's lab, embedded deep within the structural supports, away from the main blast zone. It was used as a catalyst, David. A very specific, very rare catalyst that initiates a chain reaction designed to look like a spontaneous system failure. His eyes flickered to the bag. A flicker of recognition, then fear. And, I continued, pressing my advantage, we also found identical microscopic traces of this exact polymer on the soles of your shoes. David. From the night Aris died. And not just there. We found it in the ventilation system of your company car, in the carpet fibers of your office, even on the cuff of a jacket you wore 2 weeks before Aris's death, the jacket you wore to the abandoned factory where I nearly had my own accident. The color drained from his face. The pretense crumbled. He was threatening to expose them. Omnicorp. Not the whole company, just a faction. Bioweapons. Aris stumbled onto it. He tried to shut it down, but they were too deeply entrenched. He said he had proof, that he was going to leak it all. He looked up, his eyes haunted. They tasked me. My own brother. They said it was the only way to contain the damage, to protect the legitimate research, to save the company from collapsing under the scandal. They promised me I would be safe, that no one would ever know. I designed that accident based on Aris's own research, using his own materials against him. I knew the polymer, its properties, how to make it untraceable. I thought I'd made it perfect. He paused, a bitter laugh escaping him. And then you started digging, Reed. You wouldn't let it go. I had to try and stop you, to make you disappear. My mind reeled with the implications, the vast, unseen network of power and corruption David had just exposed. This was bigger than just one murder. This was a war. The confession hung in the air, heavy and chilling. The sterile environment of the data hub, designed for information, now held the brutal truth of a brother's betrayal, a corporation's dark secret, and the silent, lethal ambition that had cost Aris Thorne his life. Anything you say can and will be used against you. David Thorne, still slumped in his chair, offered no resistance. His eyes, once so sharp and calculating, were now vacant, staring at some distant point beyond the monitors that had just broadcast his undoing. The tactical team moved in swiftly, their movements precise, securing him without a word. The air crackled with a different kind of energy now, not just the hum of the servers, but the palpable tension of a truth unearthed, a dam broken. Within the hour, the data hub was a hive of activity. Digital forensics teams swarmed the network, seizing servers, mirroring drives, and documenting every byte of data that had implicated Omnicorp's executive board. The initial charges against David Thorne were just the tip of the iceberg. What he'd revealed wasn't merely a fratricide disguised as an accident, it was a corporate assassination, sanctioned at the highest levels to protect a secret that could reshape industries. I left the data hub, the weight of the confession pressing on me. The city outside was oblivious, but I knew the quiet before a storm when I felt it. This wasn't just another case, it was a seismic event waiting to happen. My next destination was critical. I needed to confirm the final pieces, to tie the physical evidence directly to David Thorne's narrative. The air here was filtered, scrubbed, and silenced save for the software of the ventilation system. Technicians in full clean suits moved with methodical precision, their faces obscured by masks and visors. On a stainless steel table, beneath a powerful microscope, lay the last fragment of the puzzle, the microscopic trace I'd found on Aris Thorne's lab coat. The one that didn't belong. "Run the analysis again," I instructed the lead technician, my voice low. "Cross-reference it with the samples from the Omnicorp subsidiary's research facility. The one David Thorne mentioned." The technician nodded, his gloved fingers adjusting the microscope's focus. The image on the adjacent monitor sharpened, revealing the intricate, almost crystalline structure of the trace material. It was a synthetic polymer, engineered with unique properties, specifically designed for high-temperature resistance and chemical inertness. David Thorne had described a custom-fabricated delivery mechanism, designed to mimic a catastrophic system failure while ensuring the precise application of the lethal agent. This polymer was part of that mechanism. "The spectral analysis confirms it, Reed," the technician reported, his voice filtered through his mask. "Matches the proprietary compound from Omnicorp's Project Chimera database. It's a perfect match for the material used in their specialized containment vessels, the ones supposedly still in development." My jaw tightened. Supposedly still in development, David Thorne hadn't just confessed to a murder, he'd exposed a sprawling conspiracy, a network of deceit woven into the very fabric of a global corporation. The tragic accident was a meticulously planned operation, orchestrated with resources that only a powerful entity could command. The burn patterns, the unusual residue, all of it now made perfect, terrifying sense. It was the footprint of a ghost, a weapon designed to leave no trace, executed by someone intimately familiar with Aris Thorne's work and the lab's intricacies. The revelation wasn't a shock in the traditional sense. I'd suspected the depth of it for weeks. Aris Thorne wasn't just a victim, he was a casualty in a war for scientific supremacy, a war waged by the very people he trusted. By the end of the week, the dam truly broke. The initial arrest of David Thorne sparked a firestorm. The media, initially cautious, latched onto the story with a ferocious appetite as more details began to leak. High-profile arrests followed, swift and decisive. Omnicorp executives, their faces plastered across every news channel, were led away in handcuffs. The stock market reacted violently, shedding billions. The ethical debate ignited almost immediately. Aris Thorne's research, once a guarded secret, was now the subject of intense international scrutiny. Governments and international organizations, their representatives suddenly very vocal, began to vie for control of his work, citing national security and global stability. I watched the news reports from my sparse apartment, the faces of the accused flickering across the screen. Justice, in this instance, was a slow, grinding machine, but it was moving. David Thorne's betrayal was a personal tragedy, but the wider implications of Omnicorp's actions were a global catastrophe in the making. My part in the immediate aftermath was done, but I knew this story was far from over. The future of Aris Thorne's legacy, and the very definition of scientific responsibility, now hung precariously in the balance. I stood before a stainless steel workstation, its surface gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, a few sealed evidence bags laid out before me. The air smelled of ozone and antiseptic, a clinical purity that felt almost ironic given the corruption I'd just unearthed. David Thorne, the brother, the perpetrator, had laid it all bare. It wasn't just a confession to murder, it was an admission of a vast, meticulously constructed deception, designed to vanish Aris Thorne's revolutionary work into the coffers of a global corporation, rebranded and repatented under a new banner. The tragic accident was a masterpiece of misdirection, a carefully choreographed implosion intended to leave no trace, no lingering questions. I remembered the initial scene, the devastation. How easy it would have been to accept the official narrative, to file it away as another unfortunate casualty of high-stakes research. But the microscopic trace, the unusual burn pattern, those anomalies had snagged at my forensic instinct like burrs on a wool coat. They were whispers in a hurricane, barely perceptible, yet insistent. I thought of the countless hours I'd spent hunched over microscopes, sifting through dust and debris, piecing together a story no one else wanted to hear. It had been a lonely pursuit, often met with skepticism, sometimes outright resistance from those eager to close the file. The cost of that pursuit felt heavy. I'd walked through the wreckage of Thorne's life, not just the physical remnants of his lab, but the shattered trust, the betrayed ambition. It made me question the very foundations of scientific progress, the ethics that were supposed to guide discovery. Was innovation always destined to be a double-edged sword, capable of both elevating humanity and being twisted into a tool for ruthless gain? My gaze drifted to the data chip. It contained the final iterations of Thorne's research, the schematics for a process that promised to reshape industries. It wasn't just about eliminating a competitor, it was about stealing a future, about controlling the narrative of progress itself. A colleague, the lead investigator for the criminal prosecution, had called me earlier. The evidence was overwhelming. David Thorne's confession, corroborated by the forensic findings, would ensure justice, or at least legal accountability. The corporation was already facing a barrage of investigations, their carefully constructed facade crumbling. It offered a grim satisfaction, a quiet vindication for Aris Thorne. His work, though delayed and almost lost, would eventually see the light, albeit under the shadow of his murder. I picked up the glass vial. It was empty, but its label, barely legible, indicated a unique reagent, one that I had traced back to a specific, highly controlled vendor. Its presence in the lab, coupled with the burn patterns, had been the final, undeniable link in my chain of evidence. The quiet of the clean room pressed in, amplifying the echoes of the case. The exhaustion was a dull ache behind my eyes, a residue of sleepless nights and relentless focus. But beneath it, a renewed determination simmered. This case, with its intricate layers of scientific brilliance and human depravity, had underscored the profound importance of my work. It was about ensuring that the pursuit of knowledge, however perilous, was met with accountability. Aris Thorne's case was closed, the ledger balanced, as much as it could be. But the broader questions lingered, heavy and unresolved. The world was a vast, intricate web of secrets, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this wouldn't be the last time I found myself pulling at a thread, unraveling another carefully constructed lie. My mind, already restless, began to drift, not to the past, but to the faint, almost imperceptible tremor of a new file, waiting on my desk in the main office, hinting at a new set of anomalies, another hidden truth demanding to be uncovered. The work, I knew, was far from over.